the United States has really been so focused on the Middle East, so focused on Iraq, it has missed the great movements of the world beyond those borders. And I think of just how large China now looms over Africa. China has become the major patron of Africa, is involved in building the infrastructure of the African future, railroads, roads, dams, electrical plants. And China does it without question. That is, there is no ideology attached to this investment. What China gets in return is access to the minerals and to the oil and to the energy sources of Africa. So it's a completely pragmatic arrangement. There is nonetheless in that arrangement China's realization that Africa is part of the future. While the United States is thinking about Afghanistan and Iran, China is now sending African graduate students to China to finish their studies. And I think in another generation, we will see a whole leadership class in Africa that has been educated to think of the African-Chinese relationship rather than an African-American relationship. I think that kind of story is one that the American media has ignored because the White House has ignored it. And the White House has ignored it because the White House is fixated on the world after September 11th, which is to say, Islam and the Middle East. What we have done in bringing democracy to the Middle East is only exacerbated the ancient tribal identities of the region. So that here we go with our first person singular pronoun, the great pronoun of the 18th century. We go to the Middle East saying, you can become I people like we are. You can each vote as a single person. And suddenly the landscape opens to reveal a 7th century world of tribal alliances. Suddenly people are Shia and Sunni and Kurd again. And rather than see themselves as single and individual people, they see themselves as collectives. That comes as a surprise to America because I think Americans are under the impression that American individualism, Western individualism of the sort that we borrowed from Europe, is the future. And it is possible that the tribal identities of the Middle East suggest that may be on the horizon rather than the individualism of the West. There is this wariness about the stranger now in America and the unguarded border. That is not an unreasonable fear, it seems to me. But the level of hysteria in the country now regarding peasants who are cleaning cars and babysitting and mowing lawns, that we see them now in the same way that we see the terrorist. In fact, Samuel P. Huntington, a rather eminent but hysterical professor at Harvard, has argued in his new book, Who Are We?, that the Hispanic raises a deeper threat than the militant Islamists. Now that kind of language and the kind of hysteria you get from that Irish cadre of Sean Hannity and Bill O'Reilly, who are speaking to a lot of frightened men in this country. We get Chertoff to come out to tell us that the meatpacking plant was raided, as though this is a momentous event and that we can all sleep safely now. That kind of confusion, it seems to me, has only ceded to Latin America, I think, or has only ceded Latin America to Hugo Chavez and to the rise of the left in South America. I think the United States is an empty voice now in Latin America, precisely because it seems so much an antagonism against the Latin South. We no longer see ourselves connected to the Americas, and that's an enormous failure. Every morning I watch the Today Show, there's this weather map that comes on, and this man who's had his stomach stapled, he never remarks on the fact that there's weather in Toronto today, because there is no Canada on that map, and there is no Mexico on the map. The map of the United States is like a balloon. It floats across this sea of green. The only time that Canada is mentioned, or the only time that Mexico is mentioned, is when a blast of cold air comes down from the north and invades, yes, like an illegal immigrant, and a blast of hot air meets it over Kansas. Then Judy Garland flies through the air and Toto flies through the air. Then America really does feel satisfied that we are being invaded again, that the world is doing something to us. This notion of our innocence in the world is really the most disturbing part of this post-September 11th world.